Today we'll be talking about the African American Episcopal Church
by Italia.
and Alejandro.
The African American Episcopal Church is deeply rooted in the fight for African American freedom and independence, and was the first independent denomination of Protestantism to be founded by African Americans.
If you think you've never heard of the AME Church, you've most likely heard about it in 2015 when a mass shooting occurred at an AME church. A federal appeals court upheld the death sentence for Dylan Roof, the white man convicted of the mass shooting that targeted the black members of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina.
Here's President Obama speaking on it and bringing up the history of the church.
This is a place of worship that was founded by African Americans seeking liberty. This is a church that was burned to the ground because its worshipers worked to end slavery. When there were laws banning all black church gatherings, they conducted services in secret. When there was a nonviolent movement to bring our country closer in line with our highest ideals, some of our brightest leaders spoke and led marches from this church's steps. This is a sacred place in the history of Charleston and in the history of America.
President Obama also sings Amazing Grace during the eulogy for Reverend Clementa Pinckney, who was killed a month prior in a shooting at the Charleston church. This has been widely acknowledged as one of the most powerful moments of his presidency.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was
So, what exactly does African Methodist Episcopal mean?
Well, the term African is used to describe the ethnicity that is founded and makes most up of the church. Methodists follow the teachings of the gospel, emphasizing love and God's free gifts. Episcopal refers to the church's structure, where leadership is provided by a bishop and appointed by a general conference.
The very beginning of the church. The African Methodist Episcopal Church, also referred to as the AME Church, originated from the Free African Society, also referred to as FAS. FAS was an organization founded in 1787 by Richard Allen, Asmund Jones, and others in Philadelphia to support newly freed African Americans. This organization was dedicated to providing mutual aid to newly freed African Americans to build a community as well as leadership. So, how did the FAS turn into the AME?
Well, the AME Church was founded due to Americans facing discrimination in St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church. The African Americans were being pulled from their knees while praying, and this caused FAS, the Free African Society, to turn into a congregation where African Americans could practice religion without prejudice.
Richard Allen.
Who was he?
He was a former slave who had to fight for the religious independence of the AME Church, as many white people were strongly against its inception. He successfully sued the Pennsylvania courts in 1807 and 1815, which led to the legal establishment of the AME Church, allowing African Americans to practice their faith without interference.
That's crazy. I thought this country was about religious freedom.
So, where exactly could you find an AME church at this time?
Well, the AME's geographical presence was mainly in the Northeast and the Midwest, with significant congregations in the cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Chicago. It was also able to establish congregations in some slave states in the South and even reached as far as the Pacific coast by the early 1850s.
The start of abolitionism. There was a very important sermon by Absalom Jones at the Methodist Church. He delivered a Thanksgiving sermon on January 1st, 1808, celebrating the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in the United States. This was delivered on the day that the U.S. legally ended the transatlantic slave trade.
And according to Mike Angel in Holy Communion U City, he states that the first black Episcopal priest,
Wait, who is the first black Episcopal priest?
Absalom Jones, the guy that we just talked about, he addressed his predominantly African American congregation, urging them to see the event as a sign of God's justice and mercy. Jones framed at the end of the transatlantic slave trade in his sermon as a divine victory, reinforcing the idea that slavery was against God's will. This strengthened the abolitionist argument, particularly among black and white Christians. This sermon remains a powerful historical document showing how faith was used as a source of hope and activism in the fight against slavery. So what contributions did the AME Church make to the Civil War?
While Thanksgiving sermon didn't directly contribute to the Civil War, it was part of a broader religious movement that influenced Christian abolitionism by reinforcing slavery as a moral evil. It helped shape anti-slavery sentiment, which grew stronger in the decades before the war. The divide between the North and the South over slavery's morality and economic importance eventually led to the Civil War in 1861.
Many prominent civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, were AME Church members. Rosa Parks, the mother of the civil rights movement, was a lifelong member of the AME Church, and Martin Luther King Jr. was a major figure in the civil rights movement and associated with the AME Church.
In conclusion, the AME Church was founded by African Americans to create a space for worship free from discrimination, focusing on love, justice, and religious autonomy. Absalom Jones' 1808 A Thanksgiving sermon celebrated the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade and highlighted faith as a tool for activism. The church played a key role in advocating for abolition and supporting African Americans, but its growing influence also faced challenges with race and class within its own community. Ultimately, the AME Church helped shape anti-slavery sentiment that contributed to the divisions leading to the Civil War.
And that's the end.